today I thought I would do a real Billy Basics of bike fits. So over the last 5-6 years, I don't know, I've had probably 7-8 bikes, and I've never had a bike fit. Now that's not to say you shouldn't get a bike fit, and I think if I was going to do a race, a long distance race or something like that, then I probably would get a bike fit done. It's probably worth the money, and a good one. There's no point getting a bad bike fit, so get a good recommendation. Bike Fit Tuesdays on YouTube with, I forget who does it, look it up. Called James. He does, he looks like he knows what he's talking about, so I've watched a lot of his vids. But yeah, you can get a real, if you get a bad bike fit, you're not going to gain, you just chuck your money down the drain. So there we go. So I've never had a bike fit. I'm not a bike fitter. I know what I know, and this video is probably based on 60% of what I've read about and learned, probably 40% of what I've experienced and learned myself. But this is how I set up my bikes, and it works for me. Now there isn't one bike fit and that's it, and that's all you can set up to be comfortable. I've got two very different sorts of bikes. This bike here is very much a comfortable bike for long distance, and then my Canyon Ultimate is a bit more racy. I can ride both those bikes for 100 miles and not have any pain. But they're very different geometries in terms of the reach and stack. There are two different types of geometry in my head. One of those is the handling qualities of the bike, which is down to your chainstay length, your wheelbase, the trail on your front wheel, all the little things like that. That's handling. And then there's the comfort side of life, which is your reach and stack and a few other metrics. So they're the ones that are important for that. But I can ride two very different bikes and still be very comfortable. But if either of those bikes are slightly out, then it starts becoming uncomfortable. Yeah. So if you're going to get a bike fit, get it from obviously a reputable bike fitter. And the best time to do it, I think, is before you buy the bike. Get on the bike, tell them what sort of things you want to do, and ride your bike, ride there, set up, and they will look at and give you some measurements. And from that will help you buy the right bike, because I think the important thing, or right at the top of the ladder or the bottom rung of the ladder, when you turn in terms of getting a bike that's going to fit you, is to get the right size frame. Now I've never done that. I've just gone out and followed the manufacturer's recommendations. But anyway, 56-inch frame is what I've gone for. Now that's good. Now what you can do, if you go for a small, if you're not sure and you're in between, if you go for a smaller frame, if you're going to get frame bags, then you're going to have problems with the frame bag fitting into a small bike. If you've got a smaller bike, then the wheelbase is shorter. You're the same size, but the wheelbase has got shorter, so it's going to be slightly more twitchy. You get a slightly larger bike, it's going to be slightly more stable. But if you go for a larger bike that's maybe a little bit too large, or on the larger side of where you should be going, then your reach is going to be that bit more, and you're going to have to reduce the stem to pull that back in. So getting the right frame, and particularly if you're in the middle, it's important to choose which way to go, and that's where a bike fitter, I think, can probably help you out and make sure that you know what size is ideal for you. So number one of a bike fit is get the right frame, get some advice, do some research. Okay, right, nearly at the top of the Black Downs. Staple Hill to go up yet, which is a little bit of a killer once I get onto the main road. I always stop at this location here. That's a site where I think it's 27 people died in an air crash. It was in 1945 a Liberator. It was kind of a smaller bomber stroke transport aircraft, which crashed at this site here. 1945, 22 people. So always have a little stop here and pay my respects. Right, okay, saddle height is always the first thing that I look at doing, and so I get in my garage and what I do, I stabilize myself, I put my front wheel up against a wall, and so I get my feet onto the pedals and hold myself up. I make sure I've got the right shoes on, so the shoes I'm going to use on that bike, and then I put my heel onto the pedal and put it all the way down, so the pedal is pointing straight down, or the crank is pointing straight down, and I make sure that I'm sitting in the saddle in the right position that I would sit in the middle, that I'm not rocking from side to side, that I'm sat squarely in the middle, and that my leg is straight down and my heel is touching the pedal. And if I can do that, and then I adjust my saddle height around that, if I can do that, then I know I've got the saddle height pretty much there. It's very close. What I would then do is clip yourself in with the shoes that you're going to cycle in, because they've got an amount of height to those shoes. Clip yourself in, and then you want to put put the crank all the way down, straight down, so your leg is straight down. And what you should have is about, if you imagine your leg, if your leg is perfectly straight, that's 0 degrees, you should have about a 25-degree angle there from the vertical with your knee, and if that's about right, then, and it's just a visually judged thing, then I think, okay, it's pretty good. And that's how I dial in my my saddle height. And if you change your saddle, you've got to change your saddle height. You've got to adjust that again, because saddles have got different thicknesses to them. If you change your pedals, if you change your cleats, or sort of shoe that you're going to wear, yeah, then you need to just fine tune that. But that is the basics for me. What I then do is get on my bike and go for a ride. Now, with saddle height, you're not going to work it out until you do a proper longer distance ride. And if you find that while you're pedaling, you're shifting in the saddle side to side, then your saddle's too high. If you find that you're getting pain at the back of your knee, then again, your saddle is probably too high. And there are lots of things that cause knee pain. All sorts of things that cause knee pain. Saddle being too far forward will cause front knee pain. Too far back will cause rear knee pain. But again, saddle too high causes rear knee pain, and too low, front knee pain. So this is not an exact science, but you get saddle height right first, get that right, and then that's a good place to start. There we go. So if you've gone for a decent ride, you've got no pain, and you've done what I've said previously, your saddle height is probably about right, good enough for someone getting on a bike doing their first sportive or something like that. The next thing we're going to do is, or I do, is look at your saddle 4.5 position. Now it depends on the seat post and the layback that you've got on that. This one's got a little bit of layback to it, but all that really does is just change this position. So where I lock the saddle to the seat post will vary depending on the seat post. Okay, 4.5 is particularly important for the knee pain. So if you go too far aft, then you're going to get knee pain at the back of your knee. You go too far forward, you're probably going to get knee pain on the front of your knee. And also, by moving 4.5, you're changing your reach, so how far you have to reach out to the to your hoods or your tops. So that affects things. So if your bars are set up incorrectly, you've got the wrong length stem, what you'll probably try and do is therefore move your saddle forwards a little bit, but what you end up doing is getting front knee pain. You might misidentify that as down to saddle height, and therefore you may raise your saddle that little bit more. So all these things are all interlinked. So I just find that if I do it in order, then things work out generally okay. So seat fore and aft, and all I'm going to measure that seat position against is my legs. I'm not even going to think about the reach at this stage. So now what I'm trying to do is, now there's some people who say that, imagine your knee comes down here, what you take is a point from either the front of your knee. Some people say the front of your knee, some people say in here, other people say in here. So there are many different ideas about this. I'll tell you about the idea and then I'll give you how I do it. So And what I do, I've got a bolt that I tie to a piece of string. I get on my bike, I push the front wheel up against a wall or something, hold myself up onto there so I'm balanced and on the bike properly. I then put the pedal into this position such that it's pretty much flat, and I then hold one end of the string on the front of my kneecap, and I let that drop down, and then what you're looking for, or you could be looking for, is that the piece of string comes down and effectively goes through the pedal axle. Now that's one way of looking at it. Other people, like I say, look from, instead of your kneecap, looking for this part here, the little indent there, and other people say other places, so it varies. I go from the front of the knee, but this is my initial stab. So I adjust my position, I sit on my bike holding myself against a wall, holding a bit of string. Where does it go down? Does the piece of string go through the axle when it's vertical, when the string's obviously vertical? So that's part one of me getting it right. What I then do, I go for a bike ride and I cycle along, and I get maybe up a slight gradient, so that I'm maybe in tempo, so I'm doing aerobic exercise, so I get myself into zone 3, and then what I do, I slowly take my hands off the bars, take the weight off the bars, and I just see if I can hold myself in that position, so my weight is off the bars. My cadence will go up a little bit, but if that is balanced and if I can hold that, then I know I'm in a pretty good position. If I find that I can't hold my weight, so applying that little bit of that zone 3 power, if I'm unable to hold my weight, then I am probably in the wrong position and I need to move some of my weight aft. So what I do is I move the saddle aft. By moving the saddle aft, I'm moving more of my weight on the bike backwards, back behind the pedal axle, and therefore I find it easier to hold my weight. So taking my weight off my arms and just making sure that with a bit of power applied, that I don't, that I can do that and just hold myself with the weight off there, and then vice versa. If you find it really easy to take your hands off, then you are probably in the wrong place again. You're probably too far aft, and you may want to move your saddle, slide it forward a little bit. I find that is a really good way of setting up my saddle fore and aft position. Okay, next we're going to look at saddle tilt. So that is not level. Let's see if I can get it. There you go, that's a bit of a better measurement. So that's roughly level, and it's from the back of the saddle through to the front, roughly level. And saddle tilt is quite important. Once you get your height set up and you get your fore and aft of the saddle set up, the next thing to go for is to set your tilt. If you have too much forward tilt, or down tilt rather, on the nose of the saddle, so this is down but a little bit too far, then you are going to start putting weight onto your shoulders. Now over a long period of time, you've moved your body weight slightly further forward, because the mass of your body is generally up high. That's going to put quite a lot of weight onto your shoulders, and over 4, 5, up to 8 hours, whatever, you're going to start getting some strain onto your shoulders. So it's only with the longer rides this will become obvious. If the saddle is tilted too much up, then you're going to start getting pressure in this area, and it'll just be uncomfortable, and you can probably measure that or assess that relatively quickly. Okay, so here's my crazy SMP saddle. What's level there? Is that level? Is that? It's not level. Is that level? That's level.
Yeah, I like that. Give the drummer some. Let her bring in the beat and bring in another one. Drop a pum pum. That's where the whole vibe comes from. Boom, boom, clap. Yeah, I like that.
Oh, on the top now. No more climbing. Downhill from here. Nice flat, fast roads. Although they're a little bit worn out, these roads up here, but the traffic can be quite fast. And there's some amazing houses up here as well. Okay, the next thing to worth looking at, which haven't read too much about, is cleat position. Now, there's a lot of people who say, I think it's your first or your second metatarsal, which is the bit of your foot that you push off if you're going to sprint or jump, that should be laying over the axle of the pedal, and you adjust your cleat such that that happens. That's generally what I do. That's what I do. But if you're in any doubt, on Bike Fit Tuesdays, James Bike Fitting, what he basically says is that you can't really put your cleat too far back. In fact, how do I put this? If you put your cleat all the way to the back of the shoe, or as rearward as it will go, you're not losing out anything. Cleat is all the way aft. That means your foot is as far forward on the pedal as it can go. And if you do that, you shouldn't really suffer any negative effects. But if you do it the other way around, you put your cleat all the way forward, therefore your foot is further back on the pedal, what you end up getting is a bit of a rotation of your ankle, which isn't as good. That's what he says. I kind of trust what he says. So like I say, if you want to look at all of these points individually, go and look at his Bike Fit Tuesday. So cleat position, I set mine up so that the axle is under the ball of or the bit of my foot that I push off. However, if I'm in any doubt, then I move the cleat position back a little bit, so the foot goes forward a little bit. Take account of your... I'll start again, shall I? Where am I? Right, I'm going to stop here and have a drink and something to eat. Taking a shortcut, because I'm gassing too much on doing this. But right, so the next thing to talk about are your bars. And so let's talk about up and down of the bars, how high they are. Now that is called your stack, and you can obviously adjust these spacers in here. You can take these spacers out, lower this whole stem down and put the spacers on the top of the stem and then bolt it all down. Look online how to do that. So that is an obvious way to raise or lower. For me, one of my bikes, the Canyon, even with the stem as high as it will go, is still quite slammed riding position. So that's the type of bike, all down to the type of bike that you're going to buy. So this is why it's important to get the right sort of bike that you're going to buy. But I don't mind that. I'm comfortable doing 100 miles on that bike because everything else is dialed in quite nicely. This bike I want to be more comfortable. It's therefore going to be less aero because I'm now in a more upright position. For this bike, I want a more comfortable position, so I want more stack, and that's fine. It's less aerodynamic, which doesn't bother me on this bike. So there you go. Now, another way you can raise your bars up a little bit is by changing the stem you've got here. So the angle of your head tube is a certain angle to the vertical, and to ensure that your stem is level, your stem will normally have a negative angle. Now this one here the angle is 8.3 degrees. So that effectively means that if this is 8.3 degrees and this angle is 8.3 degrees, but I flip this over the other way, the stem would effectively be flat. Now, for me, that was a little bit too low. I wanted it raised up a little bit. So all I've done is turn the stem over upside down the other way. And so effectively I've made a difference of 8, so 16.6 degrees. So I've raised up the bars. That for me is a more comfortable riding position. You'll find a lot of audaxers do that, who just want a more comfortable riding position. It means you can get down to drops that little bit easier as well. If you're vertically challenged or bending, you can't bend as well as you used to be able to, then it's quite a good thing to do. Now, so most stems I think are about 7 degrees, plus or minus 7 degrees, depending on which way around you put the stem. This one's 8.3. The one I've got on my other bike on my titanium one is I think it's a 17 degree that I flipped upside down, that I flipped as well, so that is that really is tipped up, as the bars feel quite high. You can go up to 25-30 degree angles on the stem. Now the thing to be careful about with that is that when you have a lot, so if you had a 100mm stem, so the stem length is 100mm, if you tip it up a lot, the effective length, so if you imagine a triangle, so if that is my 100mm stem, if I tip it up, the angle here, the horizontal angle down at the bottom, is going to be less than 100mm. So the stem that I've got fitted on my titanium bike is a 90mm stem. So the snag with that is, because it's got 17 degrees of up tilt on it, it effectively means, you do the calculations, there's a graph, you can look up graphs online, but its effective stem length is now 85 centimeters or 83 centimeters. So how that affects your bike is it affects your handling, so that bike would be particularly twitchy. And if you were going to have a road race bike that you were racing down roads at speed, and you had something with 85mm stem on it, it would be really twitchy. But the thing is, you get away with that with something like a gravel bike, and you get away with it because gravel bikes have got something, their fork trail is quite long. The bikes are generally geometrically very stable. The fork trail is really long, and therefore the bike is actually very stable. So by reducing the stem, you have made it less stable, but actually it's still a pretty stable bike. So downhill mountain bikes have a hell of a lot of front fork trail, which makes them really stable, and they can get away with a really short stem, therefore, and still be able to handle the bike quite nicely. So on a fast road bike, you don't want to do that, because you will, I think, adversely affect your handling and make it too twitchy. On something like a gravel bike, you can get away with getting that extra, that tilt going up the other way. So there we go. So that's how you can raise your bars up and down, and the different options. Right, we'll come on to stem length now. Okay, and now finally on to stem length, which I think we've covered a little bit already. So most bikes that you buy will come with something like a medium bike. Depends on the sort of bike that you've got. If you've got an endurance based bike, the top tube will be quite short, and therefore to get the reach about right for a medium sized bike, so let's say a 56 centimeter frame, you maybe have a 110 millimeter stem on it, whereas something like my Canyon Ultimate, which is a more racy type bike, has a longer head tube, top tube, and therefore it has a slightly shorter stem that they fit. So that came, so for a medium-sized 56 centimeter frame, it came with a 100mm stem. So they vary depending on what sort of bike you're going to buy, and that is the bike manufacturer's best guess at the right stem length. For me, on almost all my bikes, I go for a shorter stem. It may be because I've got slightly shorter arms, I have no idea. Which is why it's important that when you go and buy your bike, that you sit on it, have a ride around, see how it feels, and ask them to change the stem length there and then. So you don't do what I do almost all the time when I buy my bikes, and they come through the post, is I end up buying a new stem almost every time. The only one that, no, every time, no, except the Canyon and Endurace, that is spot on for me. So buy the bike in the first place with the right stem. Now another thing to think about with stem length, it depends on the frame that you buy. So if you've gone for a small frame, it's going to be a slightly more twitchy bike, and you might find that the stem is too short, that you prefer having that little bit extra reach so the distance that you have to lean forward onto the hoods. If you've got a slightly larger bike than you should have, then you're going to need, which I think is maybe what I'm suffering from, then you have to come for a slightly shorter stem. Now, going for the bike is longer, therefore it's a little bit more stable as a medium frame than a small frame, but you're going to adjust that effectively by changing your stem length. Now, stem length affects how twitchy your bike is. So if you've got, particularly on fast downhills on roads, if you've got a 120mm stem, it's going to be quite stable. If you've got a 90mm stem, it's going to be very twitchy, which I think I've alluded to already. Now, reach is really important to get right. Let's stop here. Really important to get right, because it's where you start getting pain in your shoulders. If you've got too much reach, you're going to start getting pain along the back of your shoulders. When we're talking about stack, if you're having to lean down too far and then tilt your neck up, you're going to start getting pain at the back of your neck. So I experienced this beautifully on my titanium bike, which is why I've shortened the stem and changed the bars slightly, which I'll talk about in a second. Because I came back from my ride, and you can only really tell it from a long ride. I came back at the end of that and I had a lot of pain over the top of my shoulders and the back of my neck. Not so much on the back of my neck, but really on my shoulders. And what that means is that I've got too much weight. Either, there's two things it could be. It could be that I've got too much of my weight is forward. So that could be about my saddle position. My saddle position could be, let's think about this. Yeah, so my saddle could be too far forward, and therefore majority of my weight compared to the center of my crank axle, too much of my weight is forward, and therefore all that weight is being held by my arms, and that's causing shoulder pain. Or it could be that I've got too much reach on the bike. I'm having to reach too far forward to get onto the hoods, and that is causing the shoulder pain. Now, I could tell which one it was because the angle that I've got in my elbow here, when I'm riding, it was very straight. So I was sat in the center of the saddle, reaching out to the hoods, and my arm was straight. That's not right. So I should be comfortably like that. So riding where I've got a bend of about this, probably about 20-25 degrees in my arms, and that is where I should be. But I didn't have that. So that told me straight away, right, I've got too much reach here. What are my options? And the first option you're really probably going to look at is your stem and shortening that stem length that little bit. I haven't taken the bike out for a full long distance ride yet with the new setup, but straight away it just feels right. I've done all the measurements and compared it to this bike, and it is pretty much spot on. Bars, right, I've screwed up here recently. On my titanium bike, I bought the bars. I bought 42cm bars, which is generally from the center of the tubing on one side to the center of the tubing on the other side. But always find out how they measure it, because it can be from the outside to the outside, but generally from the center of the tubing to the center of the tubing. Now, bars also affect your reach. So some bars will have very little reach, i.e. from the top of the bar to the very front of the bar, if you see what I mean, the front of the bike part of the bar, could be quite short. And so always have a look at the bars. If you need to cut your reach a little bit, then the bars are an option to go for. And actually I've done that twice, where I just wanted to just bring it back a little bit, and I've just changed my bars. Relatively cheap aluminium bars, but yeah, that's a really easy way of doing it. Or no, it's not an easy way of doing it, it's a relatively easy way of doing it. Actually, I think the stem is probably the cheaper way of doing it than changing the bars. So yeah, you can affect your reach on the bars as well. So on the bars, the width is important to get right, or is it? I don't know. So the bike I bought was had the 44cm bars. Now my shoulders, I thought, were 42cm. I got my wife to measure them, and she said 42. Yeah, 42. But it wasn't 42. No, it's 41. But millimeters are important in this game. So measured it at 42, and then I incorrectly looked at a website and saw what they were saying, and I misunderstood what he was saying. And I thought he was saying measure it and then you add your 2 centimeters. So 42, okay, 44, I'm gonna get 44 centimeter bars. So I got those bars, and they did feel odd cycling them. When I got out moving the bike from side to side on a climb, it felt different. I can't explain how it felt different. They certainly felt more stable. The bike was definitely more stable. And I actually started getting to like it. And for a gravel bike, if you are doing tough or technical bits of gravel, then I think it's a really good idea, and I really like the stability that I felt from it. However, I went out on a ride, and because the bars are wider, whereas if you had your normal bars, let's say you had 40 centimeter bars, so there we go, but as soon as you change to 44 centimeter bars, your arms going further out, which effectively gives you that little bit more reach. And so I went back on a lot more websites and started looking at the bars as well. And so what you should do is measure, again, from your bony bit to your bony bit. I did it a number of times accurately this time, and came to the conclusion that I was about 41 centimeters. And so I think the general gist is you can't buy, I don't think you can really buy 41 centimeter bars, so you just go up to the next size. So what I should have had was 42 centimeter bars. There we go. So bars in terms of width are important. I think gravel bikes are going to start coming out with wider and wider bars. I know Curve do particularly wide bars, and I know a lot of people do go for those wider bars, which is fine to do, I think, providing that reach doesn't have too much of an impact. And so I just went, because the bike is generally going to be more of a road bike, sort of 50% road, so I thought, right, let's just go back to 42 centimeters. So that's what I've got. I haven't long distance ridden that bike yet, but I will do. So there we go, that's bars. And of course your drop, so a compact bar, you'll have less drop, easier to get down to, particularly if you're challenged in terms of how getting down onto your drops. So I like being able to get down. I like a compact bar down here. And then the other option is the flare. So I think I showed the flared bars on my other bike. Absolutely love them. If you're going to buy a bikepacking bike, get flared. I think they're a bit like Marmite, you love or hate them. Anyway, I think I've gone through everything. Oh, there's one little thing, yeah, which I haven't talked about. When you're talking about reach, when you're riding your bike, the thing to do is to look down. When you're comfortably riding your bike on the hoods, is to look down and then look through the bar here and see if it goes through the axle. So what I'll do is just position that there. So that is about going through the axle. But if you have not enough reach, you're going to be further over, and you will see the axle of your wheel forward of your bar. So where you should be is there, such that your bar here is covering your axle. You're too far back, you're too far forward. Oh, hope not coming down then. Okay, if we're talking about the bars themselves, so your bar hoods are normally here. Now if you go for wider bars, your bar hoods are going to be out this way. Now if you find that you are cycling like this with your wrist bent in, or instead of holding down here, maybe you're holding here, you're twisting your wrist in, that basically means that your bars are too wide. And that's what I find when I had 44 centimeter bars, is that I had my wrists bent in, and that was causing me stress on my wrists. So what you want is, when you're down here on the hoods, is this line between your arm, from your hand all the way up your arm, is relatively straight, a straight line. So home. God, this feels so welcoming, being back here again. Just feels home. It does feel like home. Here, the garages I used to play football in. There's my garage. when I started learning about bikes and fixing them. God, that was great fun. Here we go, let's go see my mum. Make sure she's okay.
The piece that they've got won't fit our boiler.
All right.
Yeah, I like that. When the drumstick snaps down on the snare, I start shaking out flows like I just don't care. Relentless, limitless, as a rapper I tackle her. Pattern at a travel with the African diaspora. Boom crack, cause I freak it like that. Fall back, bounce to a percussion to attack.
Yeah, so got a bacon butty at my mum. Hopefully didn't infect her with anything horrible. Seen her, she's all happy. Just because you've got a sore arse, don't think that it's the saddle. It could be a whole host of things. Maybe you've got too much weight back, which, let's think about that. Could be because your saddle is too far back, and therefore one of your 3 critical contact points, your arse, your feet and your arms, your arse is taking a lot more weight than you should ideally have. You want to share that weight with your arms. So yeah, and if you get any rubbing, it may be a saddle, but I'd always try to tweak other stuff before you start swapping out saddles. I've made this mistake quite a few times now. I've got a selection of saddles, including a Brooks saddle, just hung up doing nothing, and I wasted money doing it. So there we go, I need to get rid of those on eBay. Now I've got 155 centimetre saddles, which I find really comfortable, and I now can do comfortably over 100 miles on a saddle, and generally the saddles don't cause me any trouble. What I didn't mention about cleats, cleat positions are very important for your knees. If you get knee pain due to sideways movement of your knee, or it's not being positioned properly when you're pedaling, then you're going to get problems. So cleat position, one thing you can do is sit on a chair, put your feet on the floor comfortably and see whether they toe in, toe out, and that might help you. Oh, wrong way! I'm never going to get home. And that may help you decide which way to set your cleats. I've already said about 4.5 position, but that's about whether they toe in or toe out. If you have the option, go for something with a lot of float. If you don't know, float is the amount of movement side to side, so you can twist your foot without it. Well, once you're clipped in, the amount you can twist your foot. So with Shimano, they've got 3 different levels of float for road cleats. They are the yellow cleats with lots of float, which I recommend anyone who's new to cycling gets. Blue cleats, which I've got on my racy set of shoes, less float, and then red cleats, no float. If you get mountain bike type pedals and cleats on your shoes, then you find you've got quite a lot of float on those. So if you're new to cycling, that's what I would do, is go for something with a lot of float to start with. Last thing you want to do is give yourself a knee problem. So while geometry is really important, and it is a sport of millimeters, actually there's a lot to be said for how used your body is to riding a bike. How well is it adjusted to sitting for hours in a certain position? How tough is your butt? So don't expect a perfect fit on a bike and then to get on it, a bike fit, and then to get on it and go for a long cycle and to get away with 100 miles without any pain. You're going to get, I think no matter what, you're going to get a painful arse. You can do your best with the fit to resolve that, but I'm afraid it's hours in the saddle is what it comes down to. Oh yeah, final point, really important, is to, once you've got your bike set up properly, is to mark it up. So get a bit of Tipex. So look on here. So that is just the bar position there in terms of roll. I've got 2 marks on there. I notice the back mark. I do the same on my seat post. You can do wherever you can, just mark up on your seat saddle rails, mark up where your clamp goes, just so that if something comes loose or shifts, you can get it back to the right position. That is a good tip. I got off Duran Rider, I think that was the first time I saw that, and I thought, and I've learned that lesson the hard way as well. So, right, so I hope that's been of some use. For those of you who've been riding for a long time, you don't need to hear any of that really. But if you're relatively new to it, getting the fit is really important for your comfort. It's far more important to be comfortable on a bike ride than to be aero or to have the fancy gear. Because you're not comfortable, you're not going to go out riding, and you're not going to get the miles down. So I hope that was of some use. I'm not a bike fitter. I've read a lot, watched a lot, learned a reasonable amount over the last, I don't know, 5 or 6 years, and many pounds sterling. So hopefully that's of use. Anyway, nearly home. Cut the cycle short, saw my mum. 50 miles, not great, but other videos I've got coming up, I'm going to do a ride into Exmoor for an overnight stay, probably my mountain bike for that one. I'll do that over Easter. We've got the Brother in the Wild, which is a gravel bike, 2-day gravel bike camping thing that goes on down in Dorset. They got live music and things like that, so I thought I'd do a video of that. I'm hoping to do the Bare Bones 200, which is a 24-hour, well, you effectively got 24 hours to do 200 kilometers, pretty much all off-road, through Wales, through the desert of Wales as it's called, and that's a pretty gnarly ride. I'm not sure I'm ready for that, but I'm going to do a practice run of that probably in May, June time, and then do the real event in October if I feel up to it. Other things I've got, I'm going to go into the Netherlands, hopefully, again subject to the virus and what's going on there. And finally, I'm going to do the Giro Wales, which is a race against yourself, from the top of Wales, from Bangor all the way down into Cardiff. You've got 2 days. It's 50% road, 50% off-road. It's a bit social as well. Going with Chris, and we're going to stop about halfway down, which is a campsite, and then crack on. That sounds like great fun. Let's wait and see.
What?